Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Open Systems in the Age of Library Services Platforms, a conversation with Marshall Breeding, which is sponsored by Ex Libris, part of Clarivate. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like. Also, there's closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will hand it over to our moderator for today, Yotam Kramer, Vice President of Marketing at Ex Libris, part of Clarivate.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Pleasure to be here. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And I want to welcome again everyone to this conversation that we have with Marshall Breeding about open systems in the age of a library services platform. As Sabrina mentioned, my name is Yotam Kramer. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Ex Libris, part of Clarivate. I've been working for Ex Libris for the last almost 7 years now in various marketing positions. I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. It's currently 9 p.m. in a very hot summer evening and humid in Tel Aviv. And that's me. I do want to, of course, present our speaker for today. I think you all know him, Marshall Breeding, the creator and editor of Library Technology Guides, a consultant, a writer, a speaker. Marshall, it's great to have you. How are you today?
I'm good, and it's a pleasure to be here on this webinar today with you.
Thank you very much. Marshall, a few months ago, wrote a very interesting and thorough white paper about open systems in the age of library services platforms. You have the URL here, or you can just Google it, and probably the first result will be the link to Marshall's website. In case you haven't read it, this is the topic at hand and the thing that we want to discuss today about open systems. And without further ado, Marshall, I'll give the floor to you with the first question. You know, going back a few months ago when you started thinking about this topic, I guess my first question, initial question, why is this an important topic, and why did you decide to focus on this specific area?
Sure. So yeah, this is a topic of great interest to me. I've been following what libraries are doing in their technology and systems for really a long time, since about the mid-1980s, actually. And I've always been interested in how libraries can use technology to solve their problems and perform their work more efficiently. So openness is important. In my entire career, this has been a constant theme that libraries demand openness. They don't want their data to be held captive within closed systems. This concern has been voiced from the earliest days of mainframe computers to this current time of web-based and cloud systems and everything in between. And so it's been an interesting topic to follow across multiple decades. So, it's not a new topic that I've been looking at. I think how systems are interoperable and how they can exchange data, is something that libraries expect. Going back to 2009, I I wrote an issue of Library Technology Reports kind of on a similar vein for the systems that were in play more than a decade ago. It was called Opening Up Library Systems Through Web Services and SOA, Service-Oriented Architecture, Hyperreality. So again, it's kind of an important topic that I think has pervaded the whole kind of history of automation. There's lots of ways to assess the qualities of systems. And here in this paper and in this conversation today, we're focusing on interoperability. How do systems connect to each other? And extensibility. How can libraries interact more with the data and the functionality of their systems beyond the delivered interface? I think that's just kind of a important topic today. It's an expectation that libraries bring to all of the main systems that they incorporate into their environments.
First of all, thank you very much. I can only agree and just share that from my perspective and from my side, we also see the great importance of this topic and definitely something that we interact with on a daily basis. The need to in simple terms simply to connect and to be part of something bigger. So I definitely agree with all of your statements. Marshall, let's go to the next couple of questions. I think we just agreed that this is an important topic, but when we look and try to analyze a bit about the history, we know that in the past, libraries were more of a siloed entities, and this topic that we all feel, which is something important these days, we do see now that these days they are very much trying to connect to the academic system, definitely more compared to previous years. So can you shed some light as to why is this becoming and is, I would say, a greater trend these days?
Well, my first reaction is that libraries kind of operate in isolation at their peril. We are inherently interconnected organizations. Libraries are part of their academic campuses. They engage with communities of users. They engage with content providers. They engage with resource sharing systems. So, the idea of a standalone system, it isn't a good one, right? Libraries thrive on their organizational touch points and interrelationships. So therefore, their technology systems have to be able to interconnect as well. So for a library system to be able to connect with the student record system, financial systems, learning management systems, it saves time and effort for everyone. No one wants to have to recreate data. How do you get student data into the system? How does that flow? How do students find content in the library? They work with their course lists, with their learning management system. How can they find library content that way? So finding ways to interconnect library users is important as interconnecting the business systems that libraries connect to as well. And it's not just academic libraries. School libraries in the K-12 environment have the same kind of need to kind of interoperate and interconnect with other systems, and public libraries in their own way too. So again, it's not, even though it's probably mostly academic libraries that might be attending today, these same concerns and topics, permeate the whole library industry. So yeah, I think the interconnectivity of systems, it's in parallel, it's in tandem with the interconnectivity as libraries, as organizations. So they just got to go together.
First of all, Marshall, just a quick note. I've got a request here. If you can put your microphone a bit closer, just a comment that's okay. Perfect. Yeah,
a little bit better.
I think it is better. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So just to relate to what you've just mentioned, first of all, again, fully agree, and just sharing, some of my perspectives. Even outside the library world, we see that the world is more connected today, in every way compared to just a few years back. We can even think about a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on how everything accelerated in the areas of connectivity. Take even the platform that we're using right now, right? Zoom, as an example of being connected, and how only a few years back, don't get me wrong, people knew what it is, but definitely everyone knows what it is today. And just an example of how, these processes globally, not just within the library, I think have accelerated. And definitely I agree that within the library, besides the things that you've mentioned of being able to save time via connecting to other systems and things like that, it's even, again, things that I see, libraries are they expected and have the motivation to take a more impactful role within, the higher education in general. And one of the ways to achieve that is via connections to other areas of the ecosystem. So just sharing my perspective about that. Let's move on. Okay. Marshall, another question that I have regarding this topic is if this area of openness and open source solutions is really limited to just large libraries or consortia, or is this something which is relevant to all types of libraries and sizes?
Well, so it's an important topic to all, I think, but naturally it's the larger libraries that are going to be more likely to be directly exercising these characteristics of interoperability and extensibility. With larger libraries come kind of more complex technical ecosystems. You're going to be part of a more complex campus environment, and there'll be expectations for connectivity, as we talked about a minute ago. So large libraries, sure, they do this all the time. It's a basic expectation. But it doesn't mean that mid-sized and small libraries don't benefit from these characteristics as well. Interoperability, if you're a mid-sized academic library, you just as much need to be able to connect to your campus and content systems. The challenge is there may not be as much technical help to do that. So, it may be relying more on kind of campus IT to help things get set up and that kind of thing. But in a way, the smaller you are, the less staff that you have, the more you benefit from being able to latch systems together and create more efficient workflows. Also keep in mind that a lot of small and mid-sized libraries are part of consortia, part of networks. And so that kind of brings them into this larger library sphere in a way, where the small library exists within the technical infrastructure of the consortia. And so even though the library itself is small, it's in a kind of larger environment, and there are folks there to do those extensions and interoperability as needed. So it may be often a little bit more indirect than direct, but I would say, if you're a small library, you still have a vested interest in making sure that the systems that you use are very open when it comes to the way they, touch other systems and handle your data.
Well, absolutely. And again, just to share my thoughts here, I think that the fact that technology itself is or let's call it the open technologies, the things that help libraries connect, I think essentially is becoming simpler. And it's not a matter of only, you know, the IT or the development that can actually use these types of technologies to connect. But the fact that the technology itself, I think, is becoming simpler to use. Again, it's true, I think, for the library sphere. It's true, generally speaking. You know, I can give examples from my own marketing world. You know, how things that in the past I needed to use you know, external developers in order to get things done, and today I can do them by myself just because technology is there to support me. So I think it's the same in the library world, and the fact that technology, or the different types of technologies, hopefully we'll get to that in our discussion in just a bit, that helps libraries connect, is becoming simpler. Definitely gives an opportunity to libraries in all sizes really to take, you know, to take the leap and to take the next step in actually connecting. So thank you for that, and let's move ahead. And really the next one is about the technology. So, you know, Marshall, in your white paper, you're mentioning different types of technologies that can actually help create this type of open systems and connectivity. And I guess a question that I can only assume that, you know, some libraries are asking themselves, especially those who are, I don't know, wanting to make a change or considering adding another layer of connectivity to their system. Is there really a right approach here? Is there a right or wrong? And the second one is really, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different approaches in the way that you describe them in the white paper?
Well, so interesting question that, you know, I think that we can see that there is no right and wrong way. You know, there are ways to achieve extensibility, interoperability, all these different flavors of openness with different models and approaches. You know, within the library community, we can see, you know, obvious examples of success in all the different ways. You know, we kind of live in a time where there's open source solutions, proprietary solutions, commercial companies, nonprofit organizations, kind of all kind of building systems. And I think there's kind of demonstrated success that all of these work to a certain extent. And, but, you know, so, you know, I kind of take a neutral and hopefully objective position that, you know, you can find ways, there are obvious ways to achieve these goals of openness, depending, you know, that go along with any different solution that the library may have chosen. You said earlier it's getting easier. This is the way that software is being built these days, to be openness, to expose APIs. I think that how you do that is becoming more straightforward. I say kind of tentatively because they're still complex systems, and folks know how to do it. You know, the idea of using an API is not a new thing. So library technical folks, integrators, consultants, you know, work with APIs all the time. So they're able to take advantage of these kind of, I would say, regardless of the underlying system. So, you know, I think it's a good time in a way. You know, I mentioned that in 2008, I looked at the openness of systems, and I tell you, it was really uneven back then. The, you know, the systems were not as likely to have robust APIs. They were more standalone, and that applied, you know, across, you know, many different flavors of systems. So to see the progress that we've made in achieving openness over the course of my career is really encouraging, and to see it deployed by different organizations and different kinds of systems just reinforces that. You know, I think it's important to avoid big misconceptions. One is that it takes a lot of technical personnel and programmers to work with open source systems. And then on the flip side of that, that proprietary systems, even when they don't give access to the source code, can be programmatically open. So again, I would say the openness of the system has a lot more to do with the APIs than whether or not you get access to the source code of the deep source code of the application itself. Different ways of looking at it. And of course, there are a lot of advocates of open source system that talk about those advantages kind of as you build a system, but I'm talking about the extensibility and the interoperability of the delivered systems. So I think I've at least talked around your question. There's probably a lot more to say about it.
No, I first of all, thank you very much. That this is really interesting. If I try to somehow summarize what I just heard from you, I think that that what I'm getting from you is that really I think the question is, what is it that you as a library want to achieve, and then find the best way for you to achieve it, regardless of how you call a system, or open source, open, whether API, app. I mean, there are many ways to achieve things, and I think the question is really what's the right method for for the library who is interested in taking the next step in that direction. So thank you for that, Marshall. So going forward, when a library is now looking to improve their connectivity, what are the things that they should pay attention to?
So again, it's centered on APIs. It's this programmatic access to the system that matters when you're trying to talk about connectivity. What are you connecting to? You're connecting to other business systems. You're connecting to other information systems. You're connecting to scripts that maybe want to extract and manipulate data. So all of those things flow through an API of some sort. I don't sometimes you may be using scripts that use SQL commands, but that in a way is kind of an old style of doing connectivity. You're really working with APIs that are part of the system itself. And, in the same way that you evaluate kind of what each feature and function of the delivered user interface is, I think libraries, as they acquire new systems, are also looking at the capabilities for programmatic access to functionality and data. So the completeness of that is important. And if and so it may be that you have a system and you want to work with new connectivity scenarios. It's just a matter of getting more experience with the exercising of APIs of both your system and the systems that you're connecting to. So it's also important to look for a lot of the implementations of kind of connectivity protocols and that kind of thing. If you need to connect better to your authentication environment for access to electronic resources or whatever the scenario might be, federated authentication, seamless access, that kind of thing. Well, does the system support SAML and those kind of things? If you're needing to work with the student information system, LTI is the interoperability protocol that does all that work, and different APIs for resource sharing, and so forth. So there's lots of things to look at in addition to kind of the detailed functionality exposed by APIs, but kind of what suites of protocols are supported and available. It's also important to keep in mind that even in cases where there's good interoperability, there will inevitably be complications. Systems can be quirky at both ends. So much of what I hear when libraries trying to set up interoperability with their financial systems or whatever it be, it's the quirkiness of that other system that you have to adapt to. So, there are two sides of each technical conversation that have to be kind of mastered and aligned for interoperability to be successful. So it's also helpful to kind of talk to your peers when it comes to setting up interoperability. If you have systems that are technically capable, then the next step is finding ways to make it work. And there's almost every combination of interoperability has been done before. You don't want to reinvent wheels. If you're connecting your library services platform to Blackboard, there are thousands of sites that have done that before, so you can kind of look to them as you try to work that out. But the other point that I want to make is when you're trying to implement interoperability, it's really important to pay attention to security and privacy. When you get programmatic access to data, that comes with a lot of responsibility. That any data extracted or exchanged must be stored and transferred securely, and all processes must be consistent with protecting the privacy of library users. The possibility of technical access to patron data comes with this great responsibility of handling it according to professional standards and institutional privacy policies. So this is something I think and write a lot about lately is, how do you make sure that the library technology environment does all that it can possibly do to ensure that the privacy of those who use the systems. So those are just a few points surrounding your question. All of these could be kind of like an hour-long conversation, but I picked a few things to mention.
No, first of all, thank you very much, Marshall. Really, really interesting. And you mentioned a lot the word API, and just sharing from my personal experience as being part of Exlibris, who definitely uses APIs. APIs can be sometimes a term which can be a bit frightening if you don't, but for me it simply means a way to connect. Even take our smartphone today as an example. When you download an app today and you run the app connects to your operating system, whether it's a iOS or Android, via APIs, basically. So it's just, for me, it's just a term that basically says that there is a protocol to connect things to other things, right? This is, I guess, my take on that. And if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, it's an API is a conversation. I'm asking the system a question and I'm expecting a response. I'm interested in all the patron records that belong to this group. The response is, well, here's some response. So how do you want to see them? Do you want them in JSON? Do you want them in XML? And what fields do you care about? So, there are a lot of details in how you ask the question and the response. So request response is what APIs are built out of. And so everything that a system knows how to do can be broken down into these kinds of requests and responses that have to be formatted in technical kinds of ways, but then allow you to exercise all the data and functionality that lives in that system without going through kind of the user interfaces with your mouse and keyboard that a human user would do. So, and it's fundamentally how, a part of big systems these days.
Great, understood. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next question. So, Marshall, how do libraries make best use of their technology-focused staff? Local development projects, scripts through APIs, and how do libraries recruit the best level of technical personnel? And I would even add, for the sake of this discussion of openness, do they actually need this highest level of technical personnel for their future connectivity and openness projects?
You see, sure, great question. So every question you ask kind of depends on the context, right? So it depends. So there will always be a small number of kind of large libraries that employ the full range of technical folks. They'll have software engineers that create new applications as needed, that work with open source projects, that are kind of doing deep coding to create applications or extend applications. So, and that, software engineers are, are valuable personnel, and not every library can afford to have them. So I think that in many cases, what libraries have are technologists of a different kind. Libraries employ data scientists and other experts that use analytic engines like Tableau or R as a programming language to extract and analyze data. So that really isn't a software engineer, but a data expert and someone who knows how to work with that data in sophisticated kinds of ways. So I see that level of technologist being really needed in the library environment. Some will have what I call mid-level programmers that, you need a script written in order to be able to work through a batch of records, to do this or that thing with them, kind of working with Python or some other programming script using MarkEdit, different kinds of kind of mid-level technical tools in order to do a lot of work, beyond kind of people entering it manually. So, those I think are important folks to have in libraries these days. So I would also note that the current technical environment, cloud computing, serverless applications, related architectures, that's really kind of changed the way that libraries use and employ, technical personnel within their organizations. It means that you're using your technical folks, to say what I call working higher in the stack. You're not working with kind of the operating system and the servers and individual programming applications, but rather you are working at a higher level, a level that's kind of closer to the library staff, closer to the library user, to create widgets and tools and those kind of things that have more immediate impact to improve what the library does, as far as the way it delivers its services, the way that a technical person can kind of give tools to other library workers to do a lot of work in easier kinds of ways. So, those trends, I think, have really shifted the kinds of skills that exist within libraries, within kind of systems departments of libraries, if they're even still called that anymore. So you have fewer kind of Unix system administrators and network administrators, and more folks that are directly working with data and that are building tools for library users and library staff. So I think that's a good thing, that those who do Unix system administration, it's not a commodity, it's an expensive commodity. And if you're going to have folks that are working with technology, have them do things that are unique to the library space, unique to the needs of that particular library. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it these days.
Okay, thank you very much. Marshall, I see that let's go to the last question, because I see that we do have some interesting questions from the audience. So this will be the last written question on
Sure.
a slide. So the following represents results from one of the surveys that we ran last year, which is called State of Academic Libraries. And in light of your paper, and I definitely see here, for example, on the green side on the left, the interoperability and integrations. But in light of your paper this conversation, what sticks out to you?
Well, so these responses ring true, right? And they're not unexpected. I hadn't seen this particular survey until we started looking at it for this conversation. So, you know, my experience tells me that libraries value customer support above all. You know, sometimes it's better to have support for a system, even when it has its deficiencies, that they know they can get help. So product support. And my own surveys, you know, always is rated as one of the most important concerns. And then interoperability and integrations. Well, that's what we've been talking about today. You know, I think it's important, and evidently the individuals responding to this survey agree that it is part of what it takes for an academic or other kinds of libraries to kind of do what they do. So you know, none of these are giving short shrift. I mean, administration, product training, all of those are highly valued as well. So, you know, it's a matter of degree. But I think that, you know, the survey, you know, does seem to reflect a lot of the same trends that I'm seeing in my own surveys and my own conversations with libraries about what's important to them.
Perfect. First of all, Marshall, you know, we still have some time to get some questions, which Scott will share in just a bit. But I just want to you know, to thank you so much at this point in time, because this was really extremely interesting for me, I know for sure, and hopefully for the audience. So thank you, and Scott, maybe we'll give you the floor to ask some questions.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Yotam. Thanks a lot, Marshall, for answering those questions that Yotam posed.
Sure.
First question that we have is, I'd like to hear more about ethical concerns related to open systems. Censorship and misinformation are rising in the United States, and libraries are being challenged for their content. Who is having the philosophical discussion about editability of open resources, and how are we protecting information in open resources?
Good question. It sounds like this really has more to do with the content side of things, you know, where open educational resources, open access content, and so forth is certainly a big trend, and you want to maintain the integrity of that. But if I'm understanding the question, you know, it's important that information be delivered by libraries in unbiased ways. I'm careful not to use the word objective because that's kind of loaded these days. That anytime you have algorithms that are playing a part in the way that information seekers are getting content from the library, you'd better be sure that those are following kind of a true set of data points, requirements, or whatever, to make sure that there aren't biases trained into those algorithms. So I think that's important to be able to be sure that the content delivered through technology systems offered by a library is vetted and understood, and that there be kind of the right kind of human, usually librarian oversight to make sure that that happens in a good way. So again, without really understanding the question, that's kind of what I'm thinking as a response, but you know, maybe we can get a little bit more clarity about what the question really meant.
So I'll just share, Scott, maybe something from my end, again, without getting too much into the details. But again, when I'm seeing large companies in general and libraries, to be more specific, trying to handle this, you know, explosion of data, if it's in the academic institution world, so it's a huge explosion of academic data. If it's in, generally speaking, in the world, just huge amount of data anywhere, as a technology company, I think one of the things that we are looking into in order to be part of the solution is really all those AI technologies that helps us analyze huge amount of data, and then, in simple terms, check to a certain extent the validity and the integrity of the data at scale. So I think that going forward, generally speaking, again, without going into the specific solutions here, this or that, definitely AI as a solution to solve some of the integrity data problem is something that we definitely as a company are looking into.
Sure. And AI is a complicated thing. You can use different machine algorithms in order to check the quality integrity of data. And then as AI systems become part of search and retrieval, that's where you really have to be careful about built-in biases, intentional or not. So yeah, I mean, AI is a double-edged sword these days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question that we have is, what is a piece of advice you would give to a new e-resource access services librarian?
Well, so being a technologist and more than and not personally an e-resource and access librarian, so the kinds of things that I would suggest, one is talking to other experts that are really directly involved with that field, but having been following the realm of electronic resource management technologies for a long time, I think that the secret sauce to electronic resource management has to do with kind of knowledge bases and of different sorts that provide easy management of electronic resources, which come at enormous scale, and the ability to manage portfolios of things, individual things. I think that's kind of the way of the world these days. So pay attention to that. And then the kind of conceptual topic of real interest that also has technical implications is, the changing models of scholarly publication. How do you continue to manage subscriptions to electronic resources in what's now the traditional way, at the same time, transformative agreements and lots of other things have really shifted that realm to more open access content. So how does an electronic resource librarian ensure that what a researcher gets access to through the library is not only the stuff that you're entitled to through the subscriptions, but you're also entitled to all the open access content everywhere. So I think that becomes a even more complicated scenario in knowing what's relevant of that, what do you consider your collection, and so forth. Because I think the shift toward more open access is important. And like everything else, it's additive. That electronic resource management has become more complicated through the advent of open access content, not less complicated. So that's a few things to chew on. But again, you're hearing this from a technologist and not from an electronic resource management, electronic resources librarian.
Okay, the next question is regarding interoperability. Do you think it's time for the library industry to get beyond MARC? Or if we stick with MARC, do you see risk related to that?
This is a question I think and talk about a lot. So so when you think of the global bibliographic ecosystem that includes libraries of all kinds, all sizes, and all geography, MARC has been an amazing standard in allowing libraries to exchange bibliographic records, regardless how small they are, how distant they are. When you think about public libraries and how they get records for their shelf-ready materials, for how libraries get packages of records corresponding to their ebook collections, MARC has been kind of a great vehicle for doing that. At the same time, BibFrame and other linked data syntaxes and standards and frameworks are really important, and they have the potential of doing a lot more when it comes to finding the connections among data within the bibliographic universe. So I think that, the ability to use and support BibFrame is important in the current environment. Operationally, MARC still rules, I think, and even in kind of large academic libraries. As the Library of Congress and others shift to also delivering records in BibFrame, becomes more of an option. My main worry is how, is the global bibliographic universe ever going to shift to all BibFrame? I worry that's a very long horizon, and we certainly don't want to disrupt the success in the way that, hundreds of thousands of libraries kind of get records automatically, kind of for the conceptual advantages of being able to exploit bibliographic content with BibFrame. So I think we're in this hybrid time. We may be in this hybrid time for a while where, systems certainly used by large libraries need to be able to accept and manipulate bibliographic records and linked data standards. BibFrame especially is what people are talking about today. But with the same realization that there'll be a lot of demand for a long time to kind of work with MARC records that come from other sources, and that the more global arena is going to be MARC for a long time. So it's a hybrid world that I think that we live in and will live in for a long time.
Hey, the next question we have is, do you view proprietary systems as having inherent risk over time to open interoperability due to API access being provisioned by a commercial interest and not governed by libraries or an open community?
So that's a good question. And so it's one that different individuals may answer in different ways. I see the advantages of kind of library governed software projects. There are disadvantages of those as well. I think it's whether you're talking about a proprietary system that is owned and delivered and maintained by a commercial company, sure, you see risk there. And that's been the dominant way of delivering library software for the 3 decades I've been watching it. The open source community has been increasingly successful over the years, with the launch of Koa in about 1999. It is a valid approach, but I would say neither side is risk-free. You have to look for all the indicators of success. Is it a sustainable project in the long term? Is there adequate financial and organizational resources to make the project successful for the next 10 or 20 years? That's how long libraries use their systems. So you see, success and failure on both sides of things. So naturally, I'm not going to stick my neck out and say that one is better than the other, but I would say that we're fortunate to live in a time where there, very successful implementations of all these different ways of delivering software.
Okay, before I get to the next question, we probably won't get to all the questions that have been posed. So if you do want to do an upvote, that can help determine which questions we do ask. So in the spirit of time, just be aware of that. So that's how I'm asking those questions, is which have the most upvotes.
Okay.
The next question is, after a long period of developing discovery systems that stand alone from the traditional ILS, I've noticed a trend of reintegrating the front end and back end from a single provider with LSPs. Juxtapose this with the difficulty of integrating licensed article content into open discovery tools. How does this bode for open discovery initiatives?
Well, so it's an interesting development. I'm not sure how it bodes for the future of things, but the current reality is as described. It's more of a trend for the discovery layer to be bundled as part of the back-end resource management layer, the library services platform in this conversation. So you get advantages for doing that, maybe simpler management, by having both of the systems kind of operated by the same administrative console and configuration and all of that. So it can be a bit easier to deploy and integrate than the times where libraries were separately purchasing index-based discovery systems from whatever system that they were using to manage the print resources, the legacy integrated library system. So it was common then to have that integrated library system, and then you would buy separately a index-based discovery system to provide article level search. So a lot of factors come into play in that conversation. One is that, are there meaningful differences among the different discovery layers that would make one stay with that as opposed to one that's bundled with your library services platform? Trends show that most libraries go with the bundled one, but with notable exceptions for those that really want to stay with another index-based discovery service. So it has to do with how much a library has invested in their user community and the discovery service that has been presented to the library users, and how well that works for those users, and whether or not a bundled discovery service is better than the one that was acquired separately. The other thing to keep in mind is that library provided discovery services represent a very small portion of overall use and access to library provided content services. I hear time after time that, content providers say that, maybe 10% of referrals to their content resources come from the library's library provided discovery service, link resolver, or other pieces. So evaluating discovery services provided by the library has to be done in the context that most researchers use Google Scholar, Scopus, Web of Science, and these other kind of broader based discovery tools to get access to library provided content.
Okay, Marshall, hopefully you have a crystal ball near you because somebody would like you to predict the future. Your white paper focuses on ALMA, WMS, and Folio. As the LSP ecosystem is consolidated, do you think that the increase in interoperability, such by APIs, will eventually reverse? Or are they so baked into the offer, such as connections to finance systems, patron data, Blackboard, et cetera, that these are here to stay?
Oh, they're here to say it would be suicidal for any provider to withdraw the APIs that libraries depend on. So I'm very optimistic that the APIs will continue to be part of the offering. I don't think any of the vendors mentioned would conceive of kind of taking their systems and closing them off. It would be, I think, disastrous. Technically, it would be disastrous business-wise. So I don't think that the kind of increased competitiveness of the industry with the fewer players at all implies less interoperability. I think, if anything, the opposite. I think there'll be increased pressure to create more interoperability across these different business environments is what their customers expect. Again, I think it would not be wise for the customers of any of those providers, if that organization were to kind of cut back on expected interoperability. So I'm optimistic I'll continue.
Okay, here's another question that's related to your discussion of APIs. API is one of those concepts that I always feel like I never fully understand. Is it possible to explain it for librarians in the simplest possible terms?
Well, that's kind of what I tried to do earlier. When first keep in mind that application programming interface is a conversation that happens between computers, which is different than a user interface, which is something that humans interact with. So this is computer to computer kind of interactions. And basically one computer, such as maybe it's a Python script, or maybe it's a student management system, asks a question to the library management system, gives a request, and expects a response. So all of, there are technical libraries and all these kind of tools available that make issuing requests and receiving responses kind of part of the standard programming environment. So then the APIs of a system are all of these kind of maybe thousands of different capabilities. If you ask this question, you'll get this response. So those are documented. You've got to know how to issue the request. You've got to know how to process the response. So they're really very granular in most cases. And a lot of interoperability, is lots of stacked API requests that do kind of bigger sets of things based on kind of smaller request response interactions. I started off simple, but I ended up making it more complicated again.
Okay, thank you very much, Marshall. Just to note that in the chat, I have posted a survey that we at Ex Libris would like you to fill out. I know that Choice has a survey at the end of the session. We hope you fill that out as well. We have time for one more question, Marshall.
Okay.
And the question is going to be, many of us have concerns regarding the adoption of open technology at the expense of privacy. Concerns for surveillance when adopting technology systems platforms provided by large corporations who also serve government, law enforcement, credit organizations, as this in the case of Elsevier's user profiles, Thomson Reuters, and ICE in the United States, et cetera. Can you comment on that? More of a comment than a question.
Sure. I mean, so I've seen this comment a lot on Twitter. There's a lot of criticism, in fact, for Elsevier about this ICE issue. But it's a valid question generally. It's important for libraries to know how their data are treated. When you work with a company that only offers one product, an ILS, well, it's kind of a pretty contained universe of what happens to that data. But with the world of mergers and acquisitions and ever larger business entities that have, very large suites of content and technology offerings, it becomes a more complicated question. So I think that there's two sides of responsibility. One is for libraries to ask questions and definitively know how their data are used, and have that contractually supported. And the other is the business side. Businesses have an obligation to reveal how they use data and to be able to prove and validate that data is not used beyond the expectations that are within the privacy policies that are part of the subscription agreements that libraries sign on to. So it's a great question, incredibly complicated issue, kind of goes into the realm of what I call ethical analytics. How do you get the advantages of using analytics, but also to make sure that it's at every step along the way, is done in ways that do not compromise the security and privacy of any individual that had an interaction with the library. We live in a times where, privacy is a critical issue, for individuals in vulnerable communities, and kind of this strident and polarized political atmosphere, folks can be harmed by, if other folks know the things that they search for, the content that they access and so forth. So I just wrote something earlier today, kind of talking about the primacy of privacy in the way that libraries implement their technology ecosystem.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Marshall for taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you to Yotam for moderating the discussion, and thank you to Scott for handling the Q&A. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments.
And thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, there's one from Choice and also one that Scott mentioned that's in the chat. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you. You're welcome. I was glad to be part of the conversation today.
Bye-bye.